Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The Babysitter Tapes. In a quiet Midwestern town, a series of old cassette tapes surface in a thrift store bin. They seem harmless at first, children's lullabies, muffled laughter, faint background noise. But when played in full, hidden beneath the static is something else. Pleas for help, the sound of doors locking, and a voice that whispers instructions no child should ever hear. As police investigate, they uncover that the tapes once belonged to a young woman who vanished in 1998 while babysitting for a wealthy family. The deeper they dig, the more they realize the tapes aren't just recordings of the past. Someone is still making them. And the children's voices on the newest tape? They're from kids who disappeared only weeks ago. The first tape. It began the way most small-town mysteries do, quietly, tucked into the ordinary. The thrift store sat on the corner of Granger Road and 12th, wedged between a shuttered diner and a laundromat that hadn't replaced its flickering neon sign in years. The bell above the door jingled weakly as customers came and went, most of them hunting for cheap glassware, battered paperbacks, or old coats to get them through another Midwest winter. The store smelled of dust, mothballs, and faintly of cigarette smoke, a smell that clung to every piece of donated furniture and secondhand sweater. It was here, on a rainy Thursday evening, that Helen Myers wandered in. Helen was in her mid-30s, a mother of two with a love for cassette tapes. Not because she needed them, her husband had long ago upgraded their car stereo to Bluetooth, but because Helen collected them. She liked the nostalgia, the grainy hiss when music started, the clunky mechanics of rewinding with a pencil jammed into the reels. For her, tapes weren't dead technology. They were memories you could hold in your hand. That night, she carried her youngest, Lily, on her hip as she browsed through a bin of unlabeled cassettes near the back wall. They were cheap, $5 for $1. Usually they were sermon recordings, bootleg concert copies, or mixtapes from decades-old relationships. She didn't expect anything unusual. She pulled one from the bin. The plastic case was scratched, cloudy. The label was worn off, leaving only faint pencil marks. Side A and Side B, nothing more. Helen smiled faintly, tossed it into her basket, and grabbed 4 more. She didn't notice the way the cashier hesitated when the tape slid across the counter, or how his eyes followed her out the door. The first play. That night, after the kids were asleep and her husband had gone to bed early with a headache, Helen sat alone in the den with her old Sony tape deck. She pressed the first cassette into place, its wheels clicking. At first, it was what she expected, muffled music. A nursery rhyme. Hush, little baby sung faintly off-key, like from an old toy recording. Helen chuckled softly. Someone must have taped their child singing. But as the seconds stretched on, the tone shifted. The singing faded into static. There was silence, and then a new sound. Helen leaned forward, pressing the headphones tighter against her ears. A door closed. A lock clicked. Then, the unmistakable voice of a child. "Hello? Is someone there?" Helen's skin prickled. The voice was young, maybe 6 or 7, a boy's voice trembling with confusion. More static, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing a floor. The child's voice again. "Where's Emily?" Helen's stomach tightened. A man's voice entered the recording. Too calm. "She's not here anymore." Helen ripped the headphones off, heart pounding. The tape hissed on without her. The return to the tape. She told herself it was nothing. A prank recording. A drama project. Maybe an old radio play copied over a cassette. But curiosity gnawed at her. The next morning, after dropping the kids at school, she pressed play again. The tape hissed, the static like a wall of fog. Then, faint crying. A girl's voice now. "I want to go home." The man's reply came like a knife. "Home is gone." Helen slammed stop. She sat there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at the tape deck as if it had conjured the words itself. Her rational mind told her to throw it away. Yet her hands betrayed her. She rewound, pressed play again, needing to hear more. The voices. The tape unfolded like a nightmare. Snatches of conversation. Children's voices begging, bargaining. The man's low voice instructing them to be quiet, to listen, to obey. Sometimes there was only silence, broken by the sound of a door creaking open, then slamming shut. At one point, Helen swore she heard faint scratching, like fingernails against wood. Her stomach churned. She fumbled for a notebook and pen, scribbling down what she heard, line by line, desperate to make sense of it. The words weren't random. They were part of something bigger. But the tape ended abruptly, mid-sentence. A sharp click, then nothing. She ejected it with trembling hands. Side B was blank. The discovery. Helen's husband, Mark, found her sitting at the table later, pale and distant. "What's wrong?" he asked, glancing at the tape deck. She hesitated. How could she explain? Just something weird on one of the tapes. He shrugged, not pressing. But Helen couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, when she couldn't sleep, she searched the internet. Children's voices cassette. Missing tapes. Recordings found thrift store. Buried in old message boards and digitized newspaper archives, she found it. 1998, babysitter vanishes after night job on Miller's Ridge. The article was short, grainy, the kind of small-town tragedy that never made national news. The girl's name was Claire Thompson, 17 years old. She had been babysitting for a wealthy family when she disappeared. The children she was watching were found asleep, unharmed. Claire's car was still in the driveway. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. But Claire herself was gone. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just silence. The article mentioned one peculiar detail. Neighbors had reported hearing faint music that night. A lullaby playing through an open window. Helen's blood ran cold. The connection. The next morning, Helen returned to the thrift store. She demanded to know where the box of tapes had come from. The cashier, a nervous teenager with acne scars, stammered that donations came in daily, usually in black trash bags. He didn't know which customer had brought them. Helen pressed. The boy finally admitted one thing. The bag had come in 2 weeks ago from an estate cleanout. "Which estate?" she asked. He shuffled uncomfortably, then scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. Helen didn't recognize it, but the street name made her throat tighten. Miller's Ridge. By evening, Helen knew she couldn't keep it to herself. The voices, the address, the missing babysitter, it was too much. She dialed the local sheriff's office. The deputy on duty sounded bored at first. But when Helen mentioned the tapes, the voices, and the connection to Claire Thompson's disappearance, his tone sharpened. "Don't play the tape again," he instructed. "We'll send someone to pick it up." Helen hung up, unsettled. She set the cassette on the kitchen counter, staring at it. For a moment, she thought she heard something. Not from the tape deck. Not from the headphones. But faintly, in the quiet of the kitchen itself. A child's voice. "Don't let him find us." When Deputy Carla Vega arrived 20 minutes later, Helen was still frozen in her chair, staring at the cassette like it might move on its own. Vega picked it up with gloved hands, slipping it into an evidence bag. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Helen explained quickly, her words spilling out, her voice trembling. The deputy's face remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed something else, recognition. "You did the right thing," Vega said carefully. "But if I were you, I wouldn't talk about this. Not to your husband. Not to anyone. Not yet." Helen blinked. "Why?" Vega zipped the bag shut. "Because if these tapes are what I think they are, someone's been waiting a long time for them to resurface. And when they find out, they'll come looking." Smoke on Granger Road. The fog that had shrouded the night on Granger Road wasn't natural. That was the first thought Detective Claire Donovan had as she pulled her car off the side shoulder and cut the engine. The mist clung to the asphalt like a veil, but it wasn't the weather that unsettled her. It was the smell, burnt, acrid, with a faint sting of chemicals. Smoke, not fog. She stepped out, her boots crunching the damp gravel, and the odor intensified. She pulled her scarf up over her mouth, squinting toward the flickering orange glow deeper down the road. A farmhouse stood there, partially collapsed, flames licking its skeleton while black smoke twisted upward into the moonlight. The radio at her hip hissed. "Donovan, this is dispatch. Fire units en route, ETA 10 minutes. Proceed with caution." "Copy," she muttered, though her gaze was already locked on the sagging front porch of the farmhouse. 10 minutes was an eternity when a structure was burning. Claire jogged down the incline toward the house. Broken boards lay scattered like bones across the yard. She could feel the heat even before reaching the porch. But what struck her most was the silence. No cries for help, no movement, just the faint popping of wood surrendering to the flames. Then she saw it, a shape sprawled across the dirt near the front steps. Human. She dropped to her knees, the smoke clawing at her throat. It was a man, mid-40s, his clothes singed but not fully burned. He hadn't been caught inside the blaze. He'd been dragged out. His skin bore strange abrasions, as though someone had tried to pull him across rough ground. Claire reached for a pulse. Nothing. But his eyes, half open, glassy, were fixed in the direction of the house, as if even in death he had been watching the flames consume it. When the fire trucks finally arrived, the blaze had grown into a feral beast. Claire stood with her arms crossed, watching as firefighters doused the remains of the farmhouse. Water hissed against embers, the smoke rolling back over the road like a tide. A man in turnout gear approached her. Captain Hayes, a broad-shouldered veteran of the department. He pulled off his helmet, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "Structure was lit intentionally," he said without hesitation. "Accelerant all over the interior. Whoever did this wanted it to burn fast." Claire nodded grimly. "And the man outside?" "Not fire-related." Hayes shook his head. "Bruises, abrasions, maybe blunt force trauma. But he wasn't killed by smoke or flame. This one was dead before the fire was even noticed." Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She turned back toward the dark silhouette of Granger Road stretching into the mist. Somewhere out there, someone had set this house ablaze to cover their tracks, and left behind a body as a message. By dawn, the farmhouse was nothing but a smoldering husk. Yellow tape flapped against the cold wind as investigators combed through the wreckage. Claire stood near her cruiser, flipping through her notebook. The victim's ID had been recovered from his wallet. Peter Hollis, age 45. A mechanic, divorced, no kids. He'd lived in town all his life. No record, no known enemies. But Claire knew better. In every small town, secrets ran deeper than roots. Detective Donovan. She turned to see Officer Ramirez approaching, holding a charred metal tin in gloved hands. He looked nervous. "Found this near what used to be the living room," Ramirez said. Claire peered inside. The tin had warped from the heat, but inside were the remains of several cassette tapes. Their labels were scorched beyond recognition, but the reels were intact enough to suggest they had been deliberately stored there. Cassette tapes. Who even used them anymore? Ramirez lowered his voice. "Why would someone try to burn these, detective?" Claire's gut twisted. The word tapes instantly pulled her back to the strange package that had surfaced only days ago. A single unmarked cassette left on the desk of the local newspaper, addressed to no one, carrying a recording of screams that didn't match any known case. The tape had been turned over to police, but its origins remained a mystery. Now, in the ashes of this farmhouse, here were more tapes. She met Ramirez's eyes. "Bag them. Every piece. Someone didn't want these heard." Later that afternoon, Claire sat inside the precinct's evidence room. The smell of char still clung to the recovered tin. She carefully laid the tapes out on a cloth, inspecting what remained. Only 3 were in salvageable condition. She picked one up, its melted edge cool against her gloves. The label was partially legible. The night one. Her pulse quickened. Granger Road. She slid the cassette into an old player the department kept for archaic evidence. With a click, the tape began to roll. At first, only static. Then, faintly, a voice, a man's voice, low and distorted. "They don't know yet. She doesn't know yet. Keep recording. This will be the first one." Claire's skin prickled. She turned the volume higher. The sound shifted, footsteps crunching gravel, distant laughter, and then, piercing through the haze, a woman's scream. Long, drawn out, desperate. The tape cut abruptly to silence. Claire sat frozen, her hand hovering over the stop button. The scream, it hadn't sounded recorded in some distant past. It had sounded recent, raw, alive. By the time night fell again over Granger Road, Claire had already returned to the site. The farmhouse was quiet now, its skeleton steaming faintly in the cold air. She stood where Peter Hollis's body had been found, her flashlight beam cutting across the dirt. She wasn't alone. At the edge of the property, just beyond the police tape, a figure stood half-hidden by the trees. Claire's light caught a pale face for only a moment before the figure turned and disappeared into the fog. She sprinted forward, her boots pounding the dirt. But when she reached the road, there was nothing. Only silence. And in that silence, Claire swore she heard it, the faint click of a cassette tape being stopped. The house on Miller's Ridge. The town of Larkspur wasn't large, but its outskirts held enough empty roads and forgotten farmland to give the illusion of space. One of those forgotten corners was Miller's Ridge, a narrow rise of land where a single Victorian home still clung to the slope like an aging sentinel. The townsfolk had stopped calling it by its street name years ago. They simply called it the Miller House. Detective Claire Donovan had heard the stories growing up. Children dared each other to spend a night on its porch. Teenagers whispered that voices could be heard drifting through the shutters. It was more ghost story than fact. But now, standing at the foot of the cracked driveway with her flashlight cutting through the overgrown weeds, the house no longer felt like folklore. It felt like a crime scene waiting to be uncovered. The connection had been made just that morning. The charred cassette from Granger Road hadn't been the only one preserved in Peter Hollis's farmhouse. Among the partially melted remains, one had been labeled, barely legible, Miller's Ridge, 1998. That single date shifted everything. If the tape truly linked to this house, then Peter Hollis hadn't been just a victim. He had been a keeper of evidence. Claire tightened her coat and started up the incline. The Miller house had been vacant for decades. Boarded windows. A front door chained shut. Yet there was something unnerving about how intact it appeared despite the years, like someone had tended to it, in secret. As she reached the porch, her beam caught the faint outline of symbols carved into the wood. Circles, intersecting lines, and crudely drawn faces. She brushed a gloved hand across them. The grooves weren't weathered, they were sharp, fresh. Her radio crackled at her belt. Officer Ramirez's voice came through. "You're sure you don't want backup? That place gives me the creeps." "Claire, keep the mic. I'm fine. Just canvassing. Stay by the Ridge Road in case I need you." She unhooked a small pry bar from her bag and worked the chain loose from the door. The sound echoed through the hollow frame as she pushed it open. The smell of mildew hit her instantly. And beneath it, faintly, the lingering odor of smoke. She stepped inside. The interior was exactly what she expected. Peeling wallpaper, warped floorboards, dust layering every surface. But the silence was heavy, oppressive. Claire kept her light steady, scanning each wall, each doorway. It was in the parlor that she found the first real sign. A table sat in the middle of the room, covered in stacks of newspaper clippings. They were damp but intact, some yellowed with age. She picked one up. The headline read, "Local Girl Vanishes After County Fair, 1998. Her heart skipped. She sifted through the others. Each article detailed disappearances from the late 1990s, young women between the ages of 16 and 22, all gone without trace. Beneath the stack was a manila envelope. She slid it open. Inside were photographs. Her throat tightened as she flipped through them, grainy images of young women, some taken at the fairgrounds, others on sidewalks, one even inside what looked like a grocery store. All candid, all taken from a distance, like someone had been following them. Claire laid them carefully back on the table. The Miller house wasn't just abandoned. It had been used. Preserved. A creak came from upstairs. Her flashlight whipped toward the staircase. The boards were warped and brittle, the banister broken in 2 places. Yet the sound had been distinct. Footsteps. Claire's instinct screamed at her to retreat and call Ramirez, but the detective in her pushed forward. She mounted the first stair slowly, testing each board before committing her weight. Halfway up, her beam landed on the wall beside the stairwell. More symbols, etched deep into the plaster. Circles, eyes, and she leaned closer, what looked like cassette reels. Her pulse quickened. At the top of the stairs, the hallway branched into 3 doors. 2 were closed, 1 slightly ajar. From behind the cracked door came a faint, rhythmic sound. Claire edged forward. She pushed the door open with the tip of her flashlight. Inside was a bedroom. Dust-covered, yes, but disturbingly arranged. A mattress sat on the floor. Next to it, a small table with a cassette player, its reels turning slowly. The sound came from it, a tape caught at its end, clicking back and forth. On the wall above the mattress hung dozens of Polaroid photos. Claire's light washed over them, and her stomach dropped. Every one showed a different woman. Some smiling in public, others visibly startled, as though they'd realized they were being watched. Dates were scribbled on the borders: July 1997, March 1998, September 1998. Claire crossed the room, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the cassette player. She pressed stop and pulled the tape free. Its label, written in faded ink, read simply, Miller's Ridge. Tape 2. The air shifted behind her. She spun, flashlight beams slicing the dark. The hallway outside was empty, but the door she had left ajar was now fully open. She moved quickly, adrenaline spiking. Her boots creaked against the floorboards as she approached the hall. Something moved in her peripheral vision. Fast, low, retreating down the stairs. "Stop!" Claire shouted, racing after it. The staircase groaned as she descended 2 steps at a time, but halfway down, the wood buckled beneath her weight. The boards snapped, and she grabbed the banister to steady herself. Her light swung wildly, catching only the fleeting shadow of someone slipping through the front doorway. She landed on the last step and lunged outside, but the yard was empty. The fog clung thickly across the slope, obscuring every edge of the driveway. Whoever had been there was gone. Only the sound of crickets remained. Claire cursed under her breath. Whoever had been inside hadn't expected her, but they'd been there for a reason. Watching. Guarding. Back at the precinct, the evidence laid before her told a story more chilling than anything she had imagined. The photographs. The clippings. The Polaroids. The tapes. All pointing to one conclusion: the disappearances of 1998 hadn't been random. They had been documented. Catalogued. She slid the recovered tape into the player. Static filled the room, followed by faint breathing. Then a voice. "You don't see it, do you?" the man whispered, almost laughing. "They walk right past you. They don't even know they're gone yet." Claire froze. The voice wasn't just on the tape. It was the same one from the Granger Road recording. Whoever had haunted those nights in 1998 was still here. Still watching. And now, she realized, they had noticed her. That night, as Claire sat alone in her apartment reviewing her notes, her phone buzzed with an unlisted number. Against her better judgment, she answered. At first, only static. Then, faintly, that same voice. "You shouldn't have gone to Miller's Ridge, detective." The line went dead. Claire sat frozen in her kitchen, the weight of the cassette in her pocket. The past hadn't just resurfaced. It had come looking for her. Ashes and echoes. The air was still thick with smoke when Sheriff Dalton drove up to the charred remains of the farmhouse on Miller's Ridge. Hours had passed since the flames had been put out, but the smell of burning timber and scorched earth still clung to the wind, stubborn and acrid, like it wanted to crawl into your skin and stay there. The fire department had taped off the scene, and men in soot-streaked jackets milled about with weary expressions. Their boots crunched in the ash as they tried to determine the cause of the blaze, but Dalton had a gnawing feeling he already knew. Fires didn't start themselves, at least not out here, not in the dead of night, not in the very house tied to the last tape he had received. He parked the cruiser just beyond the yellow tape and stepped out, squinting at the wreckage. The farmhouse was a skeleton of itself now, blackened beams jutting from the ground, their edges glowing faintly red like dying embers. Smoke hissed from collapsed rafters as though the house itself were still whispering secrets through the ruin. Deputy Claire was already on scene, her notebook in hand. She caught sight of Dalton and hurried over, her face pale beneath the flickering glow of the fire truck's lights. They say it burned too hot, too fast, she said, her voice low. Like accelerant was used. Place went up like paper. Dalton nodded grimly. Anyone inside? Claire's throat bobbed as she swallowed. No bodies. But they did find something. Dalton's eyes narrowed. What? Claire hesitated, then pointed toward a cluster of firemen crouched near a half-collapsed wall. Dalton followed her, the soles of his boots crunching across shattered glass and burnt earth. One of the men stood and handed Dalton a small evidence bag. Inside was a cassette tape, its plastic warped from the heat, edges melted and blackened, but the label still visible in smeared ink. 2 words scratched in handwriting he recognized all too well. Play me. Dalton's stomach turned. Another tape. Back at the station, Dalton placed the tape on the table in the evidence room. It looked almost pitiful there, blackened and twisted, like a survivor that had clawed its way through fire. Claire hovered nearby, watching as he gently slid it into an old player they had dug out of storage. The machine whirred, clicked, then crackled with static. Dalton braced himself, every muscle taut, as the warped sound began to filter through the speakers. At first, it was just distortion, a low hiss punctuated by faint pops. Then came the voice, warped, almost drowned by the fire damage, but still there, still chillingly clear. You can burn the house, but you can't burn the truth. Dalton froze. The voice was the same distorted tone as before, masked but deliberate, heavy with menace. They buried more than memories on Miller's Ridge. Dig beneath the ash. You'll find them. Unless... The voice trailed off into a low laugh, brittle and jagged, before the tape abruptly cut to silence. Dalton sat back, his hands curling into fists. Every tape was a breadcrumb, a trail meant to lead him deeper into whatever twisted story the caller wanted told. And now, it was no longer just about haunting voices, it was about burning away the past. Claire shifted uneasily. Sheriff, if the fire was arson, then whoever sent the tape might have been here. Watching. Dalton's jaw tightened. The thought of eyes in the darkness, watching the flames consume the farmhouse, recording their taunts, it sent a cold ripple down his spine. The next morning, the ashes were still smoldering when Dalton returned to the ruins. He crouched near the foundation, brushing through layers of charred wood and collapsed plaster. Something metallic caught the sunlight, half buried beneath the soot. He pulled it free, a small tin box, scorched but intact. He pried it open carefully, revealing brittle papers inside. The edges were singed, but the words were still legible. Claire leaned over his shoulder as he read. The papers were old medical records, dozens of them, bearing the name of a single physician, Dr. Howard Granger. Dalton's stomach churned. Granger Road. The name wasn't a coincidence. This doctor, he worked out of town years back, Dalton muttered. But why hide his records here? Claire shook her head. Maybe he was treating someone connected to the farmhouse? Or maybe, her voice trailed off, maybe someone didn't want these records found. Dalton tucked the tin under his arm, his mind spinning with questions. Every step into this case seemed to uncover another shadow. And yet, beneath the unease, something else gnawed at him, a memory. Years ago, he'd responded to a missing persons call out here, a woman reported gone without a trace. No leads, no body. The case had haunted him for months before it faded into silence. Now, with the fire, the tapes, the hidden files, the echoes of that case seemed to roar back to life. That night, Dalton couldn't sleep. The tape's words echoed in his mind, dig beneath the ash. So he did. He drove back to Miller's Ridge with a shovel in hand, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the smoke that still lingered. He picked a spot near the collapsed barn where the soil looked freshly disturbed, and he began to dig. The earth was damp and heavy, resisting him, but Dalton pushed through, sweat dripping down his brow. Then, the shovel struck something solid. His breath caught as he crouched, brushing away the dirt with trembling hands. A wooden box emerged, weathered and rotting. He pulled it free, heart hammering as he pried the lid open. Inside were bones. Small, fragile bones. The unmistakable shape of a child's skull, its hollow eyes staring up through layers of dirt and time. Dalton staggered back, bow rising in his throat. The The farmhouse hadn't just been a crime scene, it was a graveyard. Behind him, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong, the faint echo of laughter, distorted and crackling, as though the fire itself were replaying the voice from the tape. Dalton spun, flashlight beam darting across the ruined land, but there was no one there. Only ash. Only echoes. The next day, the county coroner confirmed what Dalton already knew: the bones were decades old. A girl, maybe 10 years old. No ID, no clothing left, nothing to connect her to a name. The news spread quickly, and the town buzzed with unease. Miller's Ridge wasn't just a forgotten farmhouse anymore. It was the site of something darker, something buried. Dalton sat in his office, staring at the warped tape still sitting in its evidence bag. He felt the walls of the mystery closing in, pressing against him from every side. The tapes weren't just taunts, they were directions. Whoever was sending them wanted these secrets uncovered. But why now? Why after all these years? As if on cue, the phone rang. Dalton snatched it up, his voice sharp. "Sheriff Dalton." Static filled the line. Then, that same distorted voice slipped through, calm and deliberate. "You found her. But she's not the only one buried in the ashes." Dalton's knuckles went white around the receiver. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice chuckled, low and cruel. "What I want is for you to listen. There are more tapes, Sheriff. And more graves. You'll dig and dig and dig until the truth burns you alive." The line went dead. Dalton sat frozen, the echo of the caller's words clawing through his mind. He had unearthed bones, uncovered records, and walked through fire, and yet this was only the beginning. Sheriff Dalton sat at his desk, the morning light filtering weakly through the blinds. The file on Miller's Ridge lay open before him, filled with photographs of charred ruins, skeletal remains, and a warped cassette tape that had already become more than evidence. It had become a message. The caller wasn't taunting him anymore. They were leading him. Dalton rubbed his temples. He hadn't slept more than a handful of hours and days. His dreams were cluttered with smoke, static, and the hollow sockets of a child's skull staring back at him from the dirt. And then there was the phone call. "She's not the only one buried in the ashes." The voice's promise had clung to him like soot. Deputy Claire entered, holding a cup of coffee and a thin file. Her face was drawn, the same exhaustion written in her eyes. "Sheriff, I pulled what I could from county records on Dr. Granger. Thought it might tie in with those medical files we found in the farmhouse." Dalton took the folder, flipping through faded copies of hospital logs. "Anything stand out?" Claire hesitated. "Yes. There's a patient list from 1978 to 1982. Mostly farmhands, locals. But there's one name repeated more than the others: Janice Holloway." Dalton looked up. "Holloway?" "Yeah. I checked." Claire slid another paper forward. "She lived just a few miles from Miller's Ridge. Reported missing in 1981. Case never solved. No body ever found." Dalton leaned back, the pieces beginning to shift into place. A missing woman. Medical files hidden in a burned farmhouse. And bones in the dirt. He closed the file, jaw tightening. "I need to talk to someone who remembers her." They found him at the edge of town. Harold Harry Dorsey lived in a weather-beaten trailer just off Route 12, tucked behind a curtain of pine trees. He was one of the last to have seen Janice Holloway alive, or so the record said. Back then, he was a farmhand who worked the Holloway property. Now, decades later, he was a recluse with a reputation for keeping to himself. Dalton and Claire pulled up in the cruiser, the gravel crunching under the tires. The yard was littered with rusting farm equipment and old tires, a silent museum of forgotten work. Harry answered the door after a long pause, his face lined and leathery, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes flicked to the badges on their belts before narrowing. "Sheriff. Deputy. Haven't seen law out here in years. What's this about?" Dalton didn't waste words. "Janice Holloway." Harry's cigarette nearly slipped from his fingers. He recovered quickly, exhaling a slow plume of smoke. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." "She went missing in '81, Dalton said. "You were the last one to see her, according to the report. Harry shifted uncomfortably. I told the sheriff back then what I knew. She left. Said she was going to town. Never came back. Claire's eyes stayed fixed on him. But you don't believe that, do you? Harry's gaze flicked to her, then back to Dalton. He hesitated, his jaw working. You think I don't know what people said about me back then? That I had something to do with it? His voice rose slightly bitter. But I didn't. She was scared. That's the part no one wanted to listen to. Dalton leaned forward. Scared of what? Harry stubbed out his cigarette on the doorframe. His voice dropped to a whisper. She said somebody was following her. Watching her at night. She'd see headlights parked on the ridge. Said the doctor knew, but he told her not to talk about it. Dalton stiffened. Dr. Granger? Harry nodded once, quick and uneasy. She was his patient. Said she didn't feel right after some treatments. Kept hearing ringing in her ears, couldn't sleep. Then, she was gone. The silence that followed was thick. Dalton felt the air shift. Harry Dorsey had lived with this truth buried under suspicion for decades. And now it clawed its way back into the light. Dalton stood. Harry, I need you to come down to the station. Make a statement. This could be important. Harry shook his head quickly, panic flickering across his face. No, I can't. You don't understand. They'll come for me if I talk. Who? Dalton pressed. Harry's hands trembled as he lit another cigarette. His voice cracked when he spoke. The same ones who came for Janice. Dalton and Claire exchanged a glance. Fear had hollowed the man out. Whatever he knew, it wasn't just rumor. But before Dalton could push further, Harry slammed the door shut. The lock clicked into place. 2 nights later, Harry Dorsey was gone. Dalton got the call just after midnight. A neighbor reported seeing his trailer door wide open, the lights still burning. Dalton and Claire rushed to the scene. Inside, the trailer was empty. A half-smoked cigarette still burned in an ashtray. The table was overturned, and a coffee mug lay shattered on the floor. But Harry was nowhere to be found. Dalton's gut clenched as he scanned the small space. No signs of struggle beyond the overturned table. No blood. No footprints. Just absence. Claire found it first, a cassette tape sitting neatly on the couch cushion. Dalton's stomach dropped. The label was smeared, the ink bleeding from moisture. But 3 words were still clear. Witness. Gone. Back at the station, the tape hissed to life. Dalton and Claire sat in silence, braced for the voice. It came, distorted, mocking, too calm for what it said. You thought you had a witness. But witnesses vanish, Sheriff. Just like Janice. Just like the girl in the dirt. You dig and dig, but all you'll find is silence. Dalton's knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. The voice continued. Harry wanted to talk. He almost did. But talkers have no place in this story. Only listeners. And you, Sheriff, are the best listener I've ever had. The tape clicked off. Claire exhaled shakily. It's like they knew we were there. Like they were watching. Dalton stared at the blank wall, his mind racing. Harry Dorsey had been their only living link to Janice Holloway, and now he was gone. Another piece erased from the board. But the caller wasn't erasing the past completely. They were controlling it, shaping it, deciding what Dalton could and couldn't learn. It wasn't just cruelty. It was orchestration. The following morning, Dalton had the trailers searched top to bottom. Forensics found no trace of Harry, no signs he packed, no signs he left willingly. It was as if he'd been swallowed by the night. But near the back door, wedged into the floorboards, they found something the caller hadn't taken. A scrap of paper, torn from a notebook. Dalton smoothed it out, his pulse quickening. It was a name, scrawled in jagged handwriting. Lydia H. Claire frowned. Another Holloway? Dalton shook his head slowly. Maybe. Or maybe another patient. The note was the only lead they had left. As Dalton tucked it into the file, a grim thought sank in. Witnesses didn't vanish without reason. If the caller had silenced Harry, it meant whatever he knew was dangerous. Dangerous enough to kill for. And now, that danger had a new name. Lydia. Somewhere out there, someone else held a piece of this puzzle. And if Dalton didn't find her soon, she'd vanish too, swallowed by the same silence that had claimed Harry Dorsey and Janice Holloway. That night, Dalton sat in the darkness of his office, the tape player still on the desk. He replayed the caller's voice in his head, that mocking tone curling around every word. You dig and dig, but all you'll find is silence. Dalton clenched his fists. Not silence. He would dig deeper, tear through ash and bone and static, until the voice on the other end had nowhere left to hide. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew the truth. Every witness vanished. And the deeper he went, the closer he came to vanishing himself. The phone rang at 3:14 a.m. Sheriff Dalton jolted awake at his desk, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. He blinked at the glow of the desk lamp, the half-empty coffee cup, and the files spread before him. His hand hovered over the receiver. For a moment he thought he dreamt it. Then it rang again, sharp and insistent. Dalton swallowed hard and picked up. Dalton. The line was quiet at first, a hiss of static. Then the voice came, low and deliberate. You're still awake. That means you're waiting for me. Dalton gripped the receiver tighter. Where's Harry Dorsey? A soft chuckle echoed, distorted by static. Harry's gone. You look too much. He forgot the rules. What rules? Dalton demanded. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it shifted, playful and cruel. You think you're chasing me, Sheriff? But it's the other way around. I've been chasing you. Since the moment you picked up the first tape, I've been inside your walls, inside your nights. You can't hang up. Not anymore. Dalton's jaw clenched. Why the tapes? Why them? The voice hissed, as if amused. Because stories need to be told. Because silence is boring. And because the babysitter was only the beginning. Dalton's blood ran cold. The babysitter? 1998, the case that started it all. What do you mean? The caller lowered their voice, almost intimate. You're close. Too close. And when you're close, people vanish. Like Harry. Like Janice. Like Lydia Will. Dalton's breath caught. The name. Lydia H. The note Harry had left behind. Where is she? Dalton demanded. But the line clicked dead. By sunrise, Dalton was pacing the squad room, every nerve on edge. Claire entered with 2 coffees, setting one on the desk. She studied him, her eyes narrowing. You got a call, didn't you? Dalton nodded. He mentioned Lydia. He knew I had her name. He knows everything. Claire sat down, pulling out her notebook. Then we need to move fast. Whoever she is, she's next. Dalton stared at the file, the scrawled note from Harry Dorsey, the ghost of Janice Holloway haunting every corner of the case. If we don't find her first, she'll vanish too. Just like the others. Finding Lydia H. proved harder than expected. County records turned up no Holloways besides Janice, but Claire dug deeper. She combed through hospital files, patient logs, even old yearbooks. By late afternoon, she dropped a folder on Dalton's desk. Got her. Lydia Harkins. Born 1963. Patient of Dr. Granger, same years as Janice. Moved out of state in '82. But here's the kicker. Claire tapped the page, her voice tense. She came back 2 months ago. Rented a cabin near the lake. Dalton's chest tightened. It wasn't coincidence. It was a circle closing. Let's go. The cabin was tucked into the woods, half hidden by overgrowth. Dalton and Claire pulled up quietly, scanning the property. The windows were dark, the chimney cold. Dalton knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Finally, the door creaked open. A woman in her late 50s stood there, her eyes wary, a cigarette trembling between her fingers. Sheriff, she asked, her voice hoarse. Lydia Harkins? Dalton confirmed. She nodded slowly, her shoulders tense. Dalton held up his badge. We need to talk. Inside, the cabin was sparse but tidy. A single lamp lit the living room, casting long shadows across the walls. Lydia sat on the edge of the couch, her hands shaking as she lit another cigarette. I knew it would come back, she muttered. It always does. Dalton sat across from her. Tell me about Dr. Granger. Lydia's eyes flicked up, haunted. He wasn't just a doctor. He was something else. He had experiments. He said they were treatments, but they weren't. Janice told me she felt sick, wrong inside. I thought it was just nerves, but then she disappeared. And I left. I ran. Claire leaned forward. Why come back? Lydia gave a bitter laugh. Because you can't outrun it. Because every year, on the same day she vanished, I get a package. A cassette tape. No note. Just the tape. Dalton's pulse quickened. Do you still have them? Lydia stubbed out her cigarette, stood, and crossed to a cabinet. She pulled out a shoebox and set it on the table. Inside were 7 tapes, neatly stacked, each with a year written on the label. Dalton lifted one carefully. 2005. Another, 2009. Another, 2019. Lydia's voice broke. They all start the same, with Janice's voice. And then it fades into something else. A man. The static. The whispers. Claire exchanged a horrified glance with Dalton. The caller had been reaching out to her, taunting her, for decades. Dalton slid one into his pocket. We'll need to analyze these. Lydia nodded, her eyes glassy. Do what you want. Just don't leave me alone tonight. Dalton arranged for an officer to watch the cabin, but unease gnawed at him. He and Claire returned to the station, where they played one of the tapes in the evidence room. Static filled the speakers, then a faint voice. Janice. Janice, it's me. Dalton froze. It wasn't just any voice. It was unmistakable. Harry Dorset, the man who had just vanished. Dalton's hands trembled. Harry's voice continued, desperate, pleading, before dissolving into static. Then came the whisper. You see? Even the dead can talk if I want them to. Claire slammed the stop button. How the hell? Dalton stared at the machine, his throat dry. The caller wasn't just recording victims. He was weaving them into the story, blurring the line between the living and the lost. And he wanted Dalton to listen. That night, the officer watching Lydia's cabin called in. Sheriff, you'd better get here. Something's wrong. Dalton and Claire sped through the dark roads, headlights cutting through the trees. When they arrived, the cabin door was wide open. The officers stood pale-faced outside. I just stepped out for a minute. Just one. When I came back, she was gone. Dalton's heart pounded. Inside, the cabin was empty. The shoebox still sat on the table, but the tapes were gone. Every last one. And on the couch lay a single new cassette. Dalton picked it up, dread curling in his gut. The label read, You Can't Save Her. He played it right there, the officer and Claire watching. Static. Then Lydia's voice, panicked, sobbing. Please, I don't want to disappear. Dalton's chest tightened. And then the caller's voice cut through, sharp and cold. Sheriff, you keep chasing ghosts. But ghosts belong to me. Lydia has joined the story now. And when the story ends, you'll be on the tape too. The line of static stretched, rising, almost screaming. Then silence. Dalton lowered the tape player, his hands trembling with rage. Claire whispered, They took her. Right under our noses. Dalton stared at the dark trees outside, the night pressing in like a cage. He could feel the caller's presence in the silence, as if every shadow carried their breath. He made a vow then, low and fierce. No more tapes. No more games. I'm going to find him. I don't care what it takes. But deep down, he knew the truth. The caller hadn't just returned. They'd never left. The cardboard box should not have been there. Detective Marla Jennings stood in the dim evidence archive, her flashlight cutting through dust and stale air. The box was marked, Granger Case, 1987. A case long before her time, but not one she hadn't heard about in whispers. It was the first of the babysitter murders the department had buried under unsolved. Her gut twisted. The strange part wasn't that the box existed, it was that she had been here before. She had combed through this exact aisle months ago when the tapes first started turning up. Back then, the Granger files were missing. She remembered asking the clerk. He had shrugged and said, those must have been misplaced decades ago. But now, here it was. The brown tape sealing it was fresh. Too fresh. Marla crouched down, gloved hands pulling it closer. The box creaked when she opened it, the smell of cardboard and mildew drifting upward. Inside lay a stack of manila folders, a reel-to-reel tape, and a Polaroid that had slipped free. The Polaroid made her breath catch. It was a photo of a teenage girl, tied to a chair, mouth gagged. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with tears that the camera's flash had caught. In the background, a television flickered with static. Pinned beneath the photo was a yellow sticky note, the handwriting jagged. This was the first. You'll never find the last. The missing history. Marla shoved the Polaroid into an evidence bag and slid the folders onto the nearby desk. Names filled the first file. Missing babysitters, ages 14 to 19. One every year from 1987 through 1993. Their photos stared up at her, frozen in time, grins in school portraits, sunburned faces at summer camp, awkward braces. None of them had ever been found. The official reports, however, were paper-thin. A paragraph or two on each girl, with the same vague conclusion, likely runaway. Marla's jaw tightened. This was no runaway streak. This was a system that had looked the other way. She skimmed through the second folder. Inside were old cassette tapes, their labels handwritten, Playtime 1, Playtime 2, and so on. The dates matched the years of disappearance. Her heart sank as she realized the tapes were not VHS recordings, they were audio tapes. Marla slid one into the old player on the desk, the machine whining to life. A hiss of static filled the air. Then a voice. Almost sing-song. Tell them your name. A muffled, trembling girl's voice answered. Holly James. Marla's stomach clenched. Holly James. She remembered that name from the missing persons registry. The tape continued. Good girl, Holly. Now tell them where you are. A sob. I don't know, it's dark. The man chuckled softly, the sound slithering into her ears. Then silence. The tape cut off. Marla stopped the player, her chest tight. This wasn't just evidence. This was a confession preserved on tape. The vanishing. The following morning, she stormed into Captain Ortega's office, the evidence box in her arms. Where the hell did this come from? She demanded. Ortega frowned. What do you mean? These files, they weren't there last month. Now they are. Someone's playing games inside our own station. He motioned for her to calm down, but his hand trembled as he pulled out the Polaroid. His face went pale. I thought these were destroyed, he muttered. Marla froze. Destroyed? By who? Ortega realized too late what he had said. He shut the file, leaned back, and forced his tone even. Drop it, Jennings. That's an old case. It's not your concern. Her pulse spiked. Not my concern? A serial predator kidnapped and killed girls for years, and you're telling me these files were destroyed? Who destroyed them, Ortega? The captain's eyes hardened. That's enough. Leave the files with me. Marla's instinct screamed. She clutched the box tighter. No, not until I know why. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Ortega's lips pressed into a thin line. Jennings, I'm ordering you to leave that box. Walk away. She left the office without another word, with the box still in her arms. The break-in. That night, she locked the files in her apartment closet, burying them beneath laundry baskets. She slept fitfully, every creak of the floorboards making her jolt awake. At 3:14 a.m., the sound of her doorknob rattling pulled her out of a half-dream. Her hand instinctively went to her gun. She crept to the door, heart pounding. The knob twisted once more, then went still. She yanked it open, nothing. Just the quiet hallway, moonlight slanting through the cracked blinds. But when she turned back, her closet door was wide open. The files were gone. A ghost in the system. By morning, Marla was furious. She stormed into the records office at the station. Who has access to the archive? She demanded. The clerk, a nervous young man with glasses, fumbled with the logbook. It's all digital now. Everyone signs in with a keycard. Show me last night's entries. He hesitated. Detective, you're not authorized. She slammed her badge on the desk. Now. Reluctantly, he pulled up the report. Her stomach dropped. Her keycard had been used to access the archive at 1:47 a.m. "That's impossible," she muttered. "Unless someone cloned your card," the clerk offered. "Or someone in the department wanted her to take the fall." The tape that shouldn't exist. 2 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared on her desk. Inside was a single cassette tape labeled in the same handwriting as the others, Playtime 8. Marla froze. There had only been 7 files in the box. She slid the tape into a player, sweat prickling her neck. Static. Then the voice again, the same low, sing-song tone. "Detective Jennings. I hope you've been enjoying story time." Her blood turned cold. "You found the first files, but the rest, they don't belong to you." "They never did. They'll vanish like the girls did. Like you will." Silence. Then the faint sound of children's laughter, layered beneath static. Marla ripped the tape from the player, her hands shaking. This wasn't history. This wasn't some decades-old recording. This was new. Someone was still out there. And now, they were watching her. The cover-up. She needed backup. She went to Detective Paul Reeves, her only trusted ally. She replayed the tape for him. His face drained of color. This isn't possible," he whispered. "Someone inside is hiding this, Paul. Someone who's been here long enough to bury entire case files." Ortega knew. He as much as admitted it. Reeves rubbed his temples. "If Ortega's covering, it's not just him. You're talking about a whole chain of command. Judges. Prosecutors. Maybe even higher." Marla's chest ached with the weight of it. "Then we bring it down. We find the girls, Paul." But even as she said it, she knew the files were gone. The only proof they'd ever existed had been stolen from her own apartment. And the voice on the tape had promised the rest would vanish too. That night, Reeves called her. His voice was hushed, urgent. "Marla, you need to see this. Meet me at Miller's Ridge." She drove out, headlights cutting through the fog. At the abandoned house, Reeves stood with a lantern in hand, a bundle of papers clutched to his chest. "I pulled this from an off-site archive," he said. "Something they missed when they scrubbed the Granger case." He unfolded the pages. There was a ledger, names, dates, initials. The initials matched officers. Marla scanned it, her throat dry. They were logging who took each babysitter. Like assignments. Reeves nodded grimly. This wasn't just one predator. It was a ring. And half the names on this list? They're still in the department. Marla's vision swam. The files hadn't just vanished because of neglect. They'd been erased to protect monsters in uniform. And now those monsters knew she was looking. The message. On her windshield the next morning was a Polaroid. Her own apartment. Taken from across the street. On the back, a single line scrawled in jagged handwriting. "The last tape will be yours." The ledger was heavy in Marla's hands, though it was nothing more than a weathered notebook. The thin paper crackled as she turned the pages. In the lantern glow, the names swam before her eyes, each one a missing girl, paired with initials that sent an electric chill up her spine. It wasn't random. It was organized. 1987, Holly James, Art. 1988, Melanie Carter. 1989, Danielle Rhodes. 1990, Amy Viscus. And on it went, each entry written neatly, carefully, with the precision of someone keeping meticulous records. Reeves stood silently beside her, his breath visible in the cold night air of Miller's Ridge. "Look at the pattern," he said quietly. "Every year, one girl. Every year, one set of initials." Marla traced the list with her finger. She recognized some of the initials immediately. Aro, Raymond Ortega. Ich, Samuel Halpern. Thomas Huxley. Jich, Jonathan Hartwell. All men who had worn the badge in their town. All men who had climbed ranks, held influence, and shaped the department. Her throat tightened. It was them, all along. It wasn't a lone predator. Reeves swallowed hard. It was the people sworn to protect them. Echoes of the lost. Marla flipped further. The ledger stretched on into the early 90s. She stopped at a page dated 1993. The victim's name was scribbled, Emily Kramer. Her initials were marked, M. Marla froze. Reeves leaned in. What is it? Her mouth had gone dry. M.J. That's my initials. Reeves's eyes darted to her face. Jennings. It can't be me, she said quickly, though the words shook. I was only a kid in '93. 7 years old. I wasn't even in this county yet. But her name, or something close to it, had nearly been written in. Reeves studied the page. It could have been another MJ. Or maybe... Marla slammed the ledger shut. No. They wanted me. They didn't get me. That's why the tapes are starting again. Why they're leaving me messages. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The ledger wasn't just a record. It was a blueprint, and her life was already written into it. The survivors that never were. They spread the papers across Reeves's trunk under the cold moonlight, piecing the fragments together. There are gaps, Reeves said. Look here, 1991, 1992. The initials are different. 2 men I don't recognize. What if they were officers who left the force before we came along? Or they're dead, Marla muttered. She rubbed her eyes. This is bigger than the babysitter case. This ledger, it's a map of a ring that's been feeding on kids for decades. And every missing file, every vanished tape, every quiet shove from Ortega, it was all to keep this hidden. Reeves pulled a photo from his pocket. A Polaroid he'd found in the bundle. It showed 3 men in uniform at a picnic table, laughing, beer bottles in hand. Behind them, a young girl sat stiffly, expression vacant, like she didn't belong. They weren't just predators, Reeves said. They were flaunting it, posing with trophies. Marla's hands clenched into fists. We need to find out who these initials belong to. Every one of them. And we need to see how many of these girls were connected to each other. This ledger is the list of the lost. If we can trace the names, maybe, just maybe, we'll find where they went. Digging into the dead. The next day, they holed up in Reeves's apartment, blinds drawn, laptops glowing in the dim light. Marla entered each name into missing persons databases. Holly James, Melanie Carter, Danielle Rhodes. Each search brought up the same result. Case closed, presumed runaway. Her jaw clenched. Closed. Every single one. No remains. No investigation beyond a few days. Just brushed aside. Reeves was scrolling through old microfiche articles. They were always babysitting the night they vanished. Every one of them. Parents came home to empty houses. Front doors ajar, TVs still buzzing. Like someone knew the schedules. Like someone was feeding them information. Marla stared at him. That someone was the police. Reeves nodded grimly. Think about it. They were the ones patrolling the streets. They knew which families had teens watching their kids. They had access. Trust. And the ledger proved it. The dotted line. Hours passed. By evening, they had built a chart on Reeves's wall, string connecting the names to the initials. Marla stood back, her eyes scanning the web of red yarn. See that? It's a rotation. They passed the responsibility around like assignments. Reeves leaned against the wall, his face pale. They didn't just commit crimes. They organized them. And they kept records, Marla added, which means they answered to someone. Someone higher up who demanded accountability. She pointed to the very last page of the ledger. Unlike the others, it didn't list a girl's name. Just a date, 1994. And next to it, instead of initials, a single word. Cleansed. The last survivors. Marla shivered. Cleansed. That's when the disappearances stopped. When the files were erased. When Ortega and his generation moved up the ladder. They closed it all out with one word. Reeves's hand tightened around his coffee mug. Which means there might be survivors. Girls who weren't killed, just hidden. Silenced. The thought was both horrifying and hopeful. Marla opened her notebook. We need to find anyone who was taken but escaped. Anyone who slipped through. Good luck, Reeves muttered. They buried every file. But Marla's eyes were already on the clock. Not every file. If one ledger survived, others might too. Backup copies. Transfer logs. Someone kept records off-site. Someone sloppy. Called. That night, her phone rang at 11:11. A known number. She hesitated, then answered. Static hissed across the line. Then the sing-song voice again. Detective Jennings. How nice to see you reading my diary. Her blood ran cold. The list is not for you. You should have left it in the dirt. Now the girls will stay lost. And so will you. Marla forced her voice steady. Who are you? The pause. Then laughter. I'm the one who never stopped playing. The line went dead. By morning, Ortega called her into his office again. The ledger was on his desk. Her stomach dropped. Reeves hadn't taken it. She had. How the hell had Ortega gotten it? He slid it across the desk. You've been busy. Marla's voice shook with anger. You knew. You knew this was happening. Ortega leaned forward, his face dark. I know you're in over your head. You think this is about justice? It's about survival. Those men, those initials, they built this department. You dig too deep, you bring the whole house down. Marla's fists curled. Then let it fall. Ortega's eyes burned into hers. Careful, Jennings. People who make lists like this disappear. And they don't come back. He pushed the ledger into his drawer and locked it. Dismissed. That night, Marla sat in her car outside the station, her chest tight. Ortega had the ledger. The files were gone. Every lead was slipping through her fingers. Reeves slid into the passenger seat, his expression grim. I made copies, he said, holding up a USB stick. Marla's heart lifted. God, Paul? He handed it over. We still have the names. We still have the map. We can go public. Leak it to the press. She clutched the USB like it was salvation. Then we do it tonight. But as she started the engine, her headlights illuminated something on her windshield. Another Polaroid. This one of her and Reeves, sitting together in the car. On the back, scrawled in jagged handwriting. The lost are never found. Only added. The weight of the lost. Marla stared at the photo, her chest constricting. The ledger wasn't just a record of what had been done. It was a promise that it would continue. She realized then the horrifying truth. The list wasn't finished. The next name waiting to be written was hers. The photo lay between them on the dashboard, lit by the dim glow of Marla's car interior. Her own face stared back at her, caught in candid black and white, the curve of her jaw outlined in shadow. Next to her, Reeves's profile was sharp, tired, vulnerable. They hadn't noticed anyone watching, hadn't felt a camera's click. Yet here it was, proof that someone had been close. Too close. The handwriting on the back seared into her mind. The lost are never found. Only added. Marla felt the words like a countdown. Reeves broke the silence. They know we copied the ledger. Her throat tightened. They know everything. And they want us on the list next. The last road. They didn't go home that night. Home wasn't safe. Instead, they drove out of town, headlights cutting through the endless stretch of highway, past shuttered diners and sleeping farmhouses. Reeves clenched the wheel, his jaw taut. We've got two options. We leak this to the press, now burn the whole thing down in daylight. Or we dig deeper, find the man behind the tapes, and rip the mask off before they bury us alive. Marla stared out at the dark fields rolling by. If we leak it now, it'll disappear. Files will get shredded, tapes will vanish, reporters will get leaned on. You know Ortega will cover their tracks. They'll paint us as unstable. Conspiracy nuts. Reeves's hands tightened around the steering wheel. So we go after him. The voice on the phone. The one making the new tapes. Marla nodded slowly. He's the thread. We pull it, everything unravels. The return to Miller's Ridge. The mansion loomed against the night sky, a decaying silhouette. Miller's Ridge. The place that had drawn them back again and again, as if the house itself was keeping score. They parked at the edge of the property, flashlights in hand, the cold biting through their coats. Feels like walking into a grave, Reeves muttered. Marla forced her voice steady. Then let's hope we find something worth digging up. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and rot. Floorboards groaned under their steps. The walls still held scorch marks from the fire that had destroyed half the place years ago. But there was something new. In the parlor, a cassette player sat on the floor, a tape already inside. A note rested on top, scrawled in the same jagged hand. "Play me." The final tape. Marla's hand trembled as she pressed play. The static was instant, thick and suffocating. Then a voice broke through, the same sing-song tone they had heard before. "Welcome back to the house on the hill. You've been such eager listeners. Hungry for secrets. Hungry for truth." Marla's stomach nodded. The voice continued. "The girls you seek? They never screamed loud enough. That's the trick. Silence is stronger than screams. That's why they vanished, one by one. And now, so will you." The tape ended with a sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. Not recorded. Not past. Present. The man behind the voice. Reeves spun, flashlight beams slicing the shadows. "We're not alone." From the hallway, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden under a hood. But when he spoke, the voice was unmistakable. "Detective Jennings. Detective Reeves. You never should have opened the ledger." Marla's heart pounded. "Who are you?" The hood slipped back, revealing a face she had never wanted to see. Sheriff Raymond Ortega. His expression was calm, almost sorrowful. "You think I'm the monster? I'm not. I was keeping order, containing chaos. Those men, you saw their initials. They were wolves. I built fences. I chose who lived, who vanished, to keep the rest safe." Marla's stomach lurched. "Safe? You let children disappear. You let them die." Ortega's eyes hardened. "I gave them mercy. Better silence than what waited for them. Better silence than being devoured alive." Reeves raised his gun. "That ledger says otherwise. You weren't saving them. You were keeping score." Ortega's lips curled into a thin smile. "And you're on the list now, too." The struggle. The air snapped with violence. Ortega lunged, faster than his age suggested, slamming into Reeves. The gun clattered across the floor. Marla grabbed the cassette player and smashed it against Ortega's head. He stumbled, but his grip was iron, his hands closing around her throat. "You don't understand," he hissed. "The tapes were never about me. They were about legacy, passing the silence on." Her vision blurred, stars exploding behind her eyes. She clawed at his arms, desperate. Then a shot split the air. Ortega jerked, his grip loosening. He collapsed onto the floor, blood blooming across his chest. Reeves stood over him, gun in hand, breath ragged. Ortega coughed, red spilling from his lips. His final words rasped out like a curse. "The silence will outlive me." And then he was still. The vanishing files. The aftermath was chaos. State police swarmed the mansion. Ortega's body was bagged, his secrets boxed up. But just as Marla had feared, the files began to vanish. Evidence misplaced. Tapes corrupted. The ledger Ortega had taken into his drawer was gone from his office. By the time the dust settled, the case looked thinner, weaker, shakier than it should have. Reeves slammed his fist against the wall. "They're covering it. Just like always." Marla stared at the USB in her pocket, the copies she and Reeves had made. Their last proof. "We still have the names," she whispered. "The list of the lost. If the system won't carry it, we will." The reckoning. Weeks later, Marla sat in a tiny apartment in the city, her laptop open, her recorder running. She spoke into the mic, her voice steady but low. "My name is Detective Marla Jennings. This is my account of the babysitter tapes, of the ledger, of the girls who were taken and silenced. Their names were written in ink. Their lives were erased in ash. But I will not let them be forgotten. This is their story. And now it will be yours." She uploaded the files, one after another, to servers across the internet. It would spread, uncontrolled, undeniable. For the first time, she felt the weight lift, even just a little. But when she leaned back in her chair, exhaustion heavy in her bones, she noticed something on her desk. A new Polaroid. Her sleeping form, photographed through the window the night before. On the back, a message in that same jagged hand. "The silence never ends." The last silence. Marla sat frozen, the picture trembling in her hands. For all they had uncovered, for all the blood spilled, the voice had been right. The silence wasn't just Ortega's. It wasn't bound to the tapes or the ledger. It was an inheritance. A sickness passed from one generation to the next. And now it was hers to carry. The last silence,